Yeah, I could. Both of us turned to Colin.
What? I'm
Way to
just
go,
watching
Colin.
I'm just watching Carolina make me happy.
You know what's really funny is I literally was taking time to set up just now when I went to the season schedule and I go, oh yeah,
There's no games
I
left.
got to do that.
Though you
What's
should,
the thing?
when we get to the end of the podcast, you should start as if you were going to talk about.
Yeah, I'll actually get the schedule open. The Sharks are currently not in the playoffs.
Womp womp.
Boy, I felt really bad because Jamie last night was like, so like, how's Thornton doing in the playoffs? And I'm like, oh dear, he's not playing. Sorry.
Poor Jumbo.
Sorry to break it to you. I know. Hey, but Marlowe's gonna retire.
Thank God. I mean,
No.
he is retired, but he just doesn't know it yet.
I know. I feel so bad about that. Oh God. I mean, it's so him, but it's one of those things where you just, you never, even when people technically forcibly retire, you want them to know that it's time
Right.
and not sit a whole year praying it's not.
Yeah. They'll call.
God.
They'll call.
Just a bummer. And you saw the Elliot Friedman stuff I posted today.
Yeah.
Which doesn't surprise me a whole lot.
I mean, if it's Burns that goes, then cool. If it's somehow Carlson that goes and Burns that stays, I mean,
Oh
my
well,
God.
I want to save stuff for the podcast.
That is a good conversation to have on the podcast. Let's
Yeah.
I think Colin, because that's meaty, right? Like that's the wrong decision, but also at least frees up salary.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it is podcast 184.
Yeah. Hold on, I'm just getting the link up here so I can. Oh, fuck! I did that thing again. Hold on one sec.
Yeah.
have you guys been watching much of the playoffs?
I have watched 0 playoffs.
I've watched less than I usually do just because I've been extraordinarily busy with this stupid work thing. But I have watched a couple of games. I was watching the Calgary game last night, Calgary Stars game. It's I mean, NHL playoffs are NHL playoffs. At the end of the day, it's fun.
I mean, compared to last season, these aren't nearly as just savage, which I'm kind of relieved to see. I'm also relieved to see it like fairly tight officiating. I mean, just they seem to be calling a lot.
Yeah, they're definitely doing a better job so far.
Yeah, just wait till the second
far.
round, y'all.
Oh yeah. No. Second, like they start the swallowing process game 1, second round, which is why I want Tampa eliminated first round. Like Toronto needs to do that for me.
No,
I don't want
Toronto has to
win anything.
lose.
I know.
No. Toronto can lose in the second round.
No, Toronto has to
No.
lose in the first round.
Yeah.
No, because if Tampa makes it out of the first round, the whistles get swallowed and Tampa just takes off.
Colin, I hate to break it to you, but you're wrong.
Toronto must lose.
Yeah, Toronto. I don't want Toronto to win anything.
Toronto
all right.
will lose.
It's
They will
funnier if they lose in the first round, Colin.
Yeah. It's
Toronto
gotta go
will
to the
burn
story,
to the
but-
ground if they lose in the first
All
round.
right, hold on.
again.
Save it. This podcast, save it.
The
All right.
streak can end.
Are you recording over there?
No, but I am streaming. Let's start the recording. Right. Recording is go.
All right, you guys ready?
Yes, sir.
All right,
Sure.
here we go. Hold on. Hello, and welcome to Circling the Cup, San Jose Sharks podcast, episode number 184. And guess what, folks? No playoffs for us, and that means it's time for our season wrap-up. I know you've probably been waiting all season for this to get our thoughts. Well, not if you've actually been listening, because you probably already know our thoughts. And really, not a lot's changed this season. But there is a lot going on right now with the Sharks. And we're going to talk about all those things. And again, give you our thoughts on last season and our hopes for the offseason and our predictions, maybe a little bit, for next season. So this might be a little bit of a longer podcast for those of you who are listening on Mother's Day. Sorry, mothers, you might not get attended to today. Or if you are a mother, then, well, good use of your time, I feel. Anyways, I'm Alex. Here with me, as always, is the Honorable Ben. What's up, Ben?
Here's my summary of the Shark season in one noise.
Yeah, I figured you were going to do that. And of course, live via satellite all the way in Sweden, waiting for Mr. Carlson to maybe come over and hang out, is our good friend, I mean, come on, introduce yourself at this point.
Go Toronto. Beat Tampa.
Why?
That's Colin. That's right, guys. Hey, before we get to the off season, I wanted to bring up two pieces of news that popped up on the radar in the last 48 hours, I think. One is the club has made an announcement that Patrick Marleau will be making a statement about the future of his career on Tuesday. And by future, I think we all know that means that they're going to sign him to a one-day contract and have him retire as Mr. Shark. And two, there was sort of, news-ish, I suppose, coming from Elliot Friedman in his thoughts, that the Sharks had attempted to start conversations regarding an Erik Karlsson trade at some point during the season, and or may still be doing so. So, two interesting pieces of Sharks news. On the one hand, you have a very famous Shark, basically wrapping up their career. Likely, again, he could come back and say that they've signed him to a 10-year, $10 million contract, but I don't know how they would afford to do that, so I'm just assuming he's retiring. And on the other end, you have the Sharks coming out that, the Sharks have started to have some conversations, or attempted to have conversations, or entertain some conversations in regards to moving out another Shark player, and one who, I think fans are I think it would be generous to say, that the fans are mixed about Erik Karlsson. I think that the general sentiment seems to be quite a bit of a bummer due to his contract combined with his injury history with the team. And of course, those who want to be petty and make bad assumptions, his attitude as well. Although I will point out, and Colin, I'm sure you will too, he's just,
Swedish.
Yeah. And actually, I want to point that out. And here's why. For those of you who have traveled around, one thing you probably know, especially if you've lived in an area for any given point in time, like I spent, quite a while in Amsterdam for work, which is not Sweden, understand. But
yeah, be careful.
But the Dutch are they're super friendly. They're also very direct. And every Swede I've ever met, Colin, feel free to bounce us back, somewhat the same way. So,
mixed bag.
Mixed bag, but you do need to be a little bit careful in just assuming that, because, Erik Karlsson may sound cold or direct in press conferences means that he's a jerk or doesn't care. I don't necessarily think that's what's going on. Although I will say that one thing that I did not find I wasn't super thrilled about personally from his exit interview was, he was talking about how, they had made the decision to basically, sit him the rest of the season, given, the lack of value in having him play when he, had an injury, and all the talk about, really immediately getting ready and starting to go and getting ready for next season. No, and then maybe playing in Worlds. I understand what he meant by it, but I also understand why quite a few fans probably that wrinkled him the wrong way. But that's the Sharks news. Do you guys want to talk about either one of those things? I don't think there's a whole lot to talk about Marleau retiring. I think we all kind of knew this was coming, correct?
Everyone but Marleau knew it was coming.
Right. And that's the sad part.
Yeah.
At the end of the day is, he spent an entire, season hoping to be picked up. I mean, you never really look. Marleau did a lot for the Sharks. He will always be a Shark, despite having played a couple of other franchises briefly in the twilight of his career. But you always kind of I don't know. You just don't want it to be that sad. But he had a hell of a career, and he I definitely would be happy. I think we said this the first time around. I'd be very happy with them signing him to a honorary 1-year contract or a 1-day contract for the sake of retiring him a Shark.
Yep. Yeah. I'm sad he went off to other teams. Like I'm sad those teams didn't really do anything. Like he just sort of went and nothing happened. Because it would have been like I'm one of those sports fans who would like to see somebody do an entire career with a franchise. But they also have to do what's best for their career. So
yeah. Well, you can't fault him either. I mean, this is a guy who was nothing but dedicated to the Sharks for his entire career. And then when it came to a point where it was clear the Sharks just were not going to be in the position to compete, I think he and them making the decision to try to move him to potential cup contenders was a class thing and all around the right move for both parties. Now, when he came back, I questioned that quite a bit, and we did at the time. But same goes for Jumbo, right? You don't want to see him somewhere else. Oh, I mean, he started somewhere else, obviously, but once you'd been the Sharks for so long. But then at the same time, you kind of look at where the Sharks are now, and you realize that would basically just be kind of a death knell on any hopes of him ever lifting a cup. And again, I think my feelings are that Marleau and Thornton certainly did a lot and enough to be worthy of that sort of award, just never got there. The Sharks couldn't get him across the line for multiple reasons. Sometimes bad luck, sometimes terrible injury, sometimes just the playoffs being hard, sometimes bad coaching, but there were plenty of opportunities.
Sometimes all of the above.
Sometimes all of the, yeah, for sure. But yeah, I don't know. Ben, any thoughts on Marleau retiring? Surprised, not surprised, not surprised.
Wait. I want to throw this in before Ben goes.
Yeah.
My biggest regret of Marleau retiring? Pavelski not being a Shark to wave goodbye. Go, Ben.
Yeah. Sharks. I got news, Sharks fans. I can't take another one of the Sharks never should have traded paths. Look how good he's doing now. Hindsight.
To the Marleau question, I thought he'd already retired. That's how little I care about this.
Cool.
and
mean.
I didn't. I guess I thought earlier this season he realized that nobody was going to call him and he retired, and I just missed it.
I mean, he probably I'm sure he did. There just had never been an official announcement, and I don't necessarily know that meant that he was holding out hope at this point that he was going to get picked up. I mean, I think he probably had to realize by at least the midpoint of the season, the odds were very slim that anyone was going to suddenly pick him up.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
it's a younger, faster game, and it's a even on a short contract for a guy like Marleau, could he still maybe hack it on a fourth line?
No.
Probably somewhere, but you have to ask whether or not that's valuable to the team.
Right.
Again, we've complained all season about, at least up until the last couple of weeks, about the Sharks slotting guys that don't need the experience and that aren't going to do anything in that spot versus slotting guys who need to grow and develop and get the experience. So, I mean, that's the other thing you got to look at when it comes to a guy like Marleau is, again, he could probably play somewhere to some extent, but it's at the expense of taking the spot away from someone who might be a part of the future for a franchise. And that's not really a trade you make. I don't know. Sorry, Ben.
And Marleau's not he's not a finishing piece that can't be
not at this.
He doesn't bring tools that can't be had in somebody faster and slightly better. So
yeah.
It's just he's aged out.
One day, yes. Now, no. Ben. You there, Ben?
He's not a fourth liner anymore. That's all I wanted to say.
Oh yeah. On the Karlsson front, again, this isn't one of those things where I'm not. Despite the fact that the Sharks seem to say one thing and then it's tough to tell what they're doing consistently, I'm not terribly surprised that the Sharks would have had conversations about either. Right now, it's more focused on Karlsson, but I would not be shocked to see that they've had conversations about Burns as well, because I think the club is smart enough to understand their contract situation and their cap situation, and also smart enough to understand that those are probably maybe more so Burns than Karlsson at this point, but those are pieces that you could move and get some relief from, even though you're probably going to eat some cap to do it. We're going to have to see, in the offseason what happens. I mean, obviously the Sharks, they're looking for a new general manager. They are keeping, it sounds like, their top management in place regardless of that general manager. We'll see if that holds, but it's, depending on how you want to look at it, it's not necessarily the most encouraging thing if you're really looking for full-on change. But I guarantee you that whoever comes in, while the Sharks are going to be interviewing someone who will have to lay out a plan to get them to compete ASAP per their guidance, obviously in order to do that, there's going to have to be some shifting of players, and there's going to have to be some movement at some scale. Now, some of that might come from not, bringing people back, sure, but also, with the Kane situation right now, right, it's arbitration's taking quite a bit here, which probably means you'd have to assume it means that the Sharks are going to be on the hook for some of that salary, and they're going to need to free up space in order to do stuff like get Timo Meier signed, which the club has indicated that they want to do, and it sounds like Timo wants to do. So something's going to have to give here, and I think it would be fair to look at your three really expensive defensemen as sort of in the crosshairs for something. Now, not all three of them necessarily. A lot of people asked Vlasic about the potential of a buyout at the X interviews. I'm not sure what you thought he was going to say or how he thought he was going to take a question like that, because, one, knowing him, he doesn't like to talk about that stuff, and two, it's not the best,
Wait.
Understand, but not the nicest question. But yes, go on, Colin.
Are you saying you're not feeling bullish on Vlasic?
No. What I'm saying is, he was asked about a potential buyout, and he was pretty snarky in his response. And my point is, I'm not sure what you thought he was going to say when you asked that question. I would personally buy Vlasic out. The club, Joe Will at least, it said he's bullish. Now, again, you can take that with a grain of salt if you want. Bullish is a little bit of a stronger word than I would use if you were trying to be, a little bit neutral or whatever. But I, if I'm the GM, the new GM, which I'm not, I would buy out Vlasic, and I would try to move Karlsson or Burns, more likely Burns, I think, because I do think if Karlsson can stay healthy and you can keep him happy, I think that Karlsson is a better player than Burns and better for the franchise. However, there's a lot of, ifs there. I also think that, Burns has a huge ranch in Dallas now, and that's not an indictment or anything, but it's just, to me, when people sign no movement, no trade clauses, a lot of times it's because they don't want to, they want to settle their roots and have that security and all that kind of stuff. And that's totally valid thing. I would probably look for the same thing, right? That's where I am in my point in my life where I'm not really looking to move. So, I want that security. But, if you're talking about a guy who has a huge ranch elsewhere that he may rather be at, then it might be more appealing. And the other thing, too, to keep in mind is I know I've been the one that's been, in years past, really annoying about sort of the no movement and no trade clauses and the realities of them. However, I think for both of those players in particular, neither one of them, I think, if they had their choice, really, really wants to stay in a scenario where this is what the franchise is like for a couple more years or in a rebuild, because they're at a point now where they don't have a ton more chances to necessarily go out and win a cup. So I do think for both of those players, it's probably a bit easier to talk them out of those clauses. Now, the flip side of it is it's not necessarily easier to talk any other franchise into those contracts, especially not without the Sharks taking a sizable bite out of them. But I think, in some respects, it's probably best for at least with one of those guys, for other than Vlasic, who clearly does not want to be bought out. But as far as Burns and Karlsson go, it's probably best for one of them in the franchise to move on, because it's going to allow the franchise to take that cap space and apply it somewhere else. And it's going to give that other player, hopefully, a shot to, be on a team that might have a shot at winning in the next year or two, because I think either one of them would be incredibly foolish to think that the Sharks are, like a year out from a cup, barring some craziness, in my opinion.
I mean, who is on the bubble or like a potential contender who could absorb one of those contracts? Like we would end up eating
the Sharks have
half
to eat
of it.
it.
Oh,
Yeah.
sure. As your terrible pun went, the Sharks would have to take a bite of it, but
Nice.
but still, like that leaves us at like what 5 and like still holding $9 million respectively. So
so here's I'm looking at the sort of buyout calculator on Cap Friendly, and you don't want to trade Vlasic, you want to buy him out. So
Right.
The reason for that is you save about $3.3 million next year and $5.5 million the year after, right? So that's useful money, and then it's sort of reduces over time, but that's fine. Burns, you'd only save $2 million a year, and so that's a trade, right? That's a trade where you agree to take as much of the salary as you would otherwise have to pay with a buyout, and not take the other penalties, right? So it's clearly Burns is the trade target if you want to move one of these guys.
Well, and to note,
Plus teams think he's good still.
Yeah. I mean, I think Burns, guys like Burns and Karlsson, still have trade value.
Yeah.
I don't think Vlasic has trade value at all.
Oh no, absolutely not.
Yeah.
No, he's way too slow. I loved Vlasic's defensive play when he was in his prime.
He had run.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yes. But no, he can't keep up, and there just seems to be defensive players coming out of the woods with every draft. So
yeah,
it's just the league is getting very entertaining, but it's not the 2010s league anymore.
No, yeah, especially since it's not as clutch and grab. I mean, if your skating ability and speed is where Vlasic's is at this point, you're just kind of left out. Before we get too far off in these off-season things, and apologies for spinning us off there too early, let's talk about this last season. We didn't pod as much, I think, this season, and part of that was mainly because, tough to coordinate our schedules, but also, week to week, it didn't really feel like a lot was necessarily changing, and there was a lot to cover. Now that the season's done for the San Jose Sharks, how do you guys feel about the season? I mean, what are your final thoughts? How would you review it, so to speak? And why don't we start off with Ben, because I know Colin, you and I have been talking quite a bit so far.
I mean, ultimately, it was a waste of goddamn time. I mean, 80% of it, players who don't matter were focused on, and the players we needed to be seeing developed were not. So my overall, again, I'm not joking when I say you can sum up how I feel about this season with a wet fart noise. The Sharks could not. I mean, so it wasn't nearly as mismanaged maybe as the prior year, but it's still. What was the fucking point? This team was never actually a playoff contender, even in the early going when things were bouncing well for them. And that sort of led to an emphasis of playing, guys who shouldn't be on NHL ice, like Matt Nieto, for a very long time, because allegedly he's really good at the penalty kill, which is to say that he plays a lot of penalty kill minutes, but doesn't necessarily do much with those minutes. And And so, I say 80% waste of time because, the last 20% of the season, we finally started to actually see the team do a little bit more of what it needed to, partly thanks to injuries, partly thanks to, resignation. And we did get to see, Bordelot, Noah Gregor figured shit out. We got to see a little bit more of Ryan Merkley, which is another good reason to move a guy like Burns, right? Because you guys always bitch and moan that these puck distributors, we don't need as many of them as we've got. And I disagree, but, let's move Burns, and then you guys can be happy that Merkley is up, is how I feel about that. Balcers played well when he was healthy. Parabanov was fantastic. So that was good to see, except now he's going to be more expensive. We learned that probably you can let go of Gadjevich. He's never going to be anything. Oh, Scott Reedy was a revelation in sort of the last 20% of the season, too. He seemed to figure it out. Leonard was looking real good before he got hurt. The stuff we sort of saw in the last few weeks where the Sharks were losing but being entertaining with young players was kind of fun, whereas the other 80% was not very fun, I felt.
Yeah.
So
I think that's my challenge with the season 2. I mean, in terms of it being a waste of time, I agree. This was a complete wasted season.
Yeah.
Yes, it was nice to see a lot of that stuff at the end, and yes, it was a little bit fun in the beginning. But the reality is that this is what the Sharks should have been doing all along.
Yes, exactly.
If the Sharks had run with the way that they were operating more towards the end of the season, throughout the season, then regardless of where they ended up in the standing, I would have thought it was worth it, especially if they were playing the correct players and we were seeing the development.
Yeah. Chemlevsky finally seemed to be. I mean, this is the thing, right? Like and this is the problem with the Buffner mindset, is that he thinks winning hockey is veterans, but they played veterans and lost, right?
Yeah.
And
right.
They could have been playing young guys and probably actually won more, but he's too stupid to know that. So
yeah. It was interesting to see the Sharks being I'm gonna pick these words very carefully. No less in those close games with the kids than they were when it was just the vets. And the flip of that is that the kids gaining the experience was way more valuable than the vets. So if you're going to lose every game by 1 and you're going to play every game relatively all right, it's much better to do it with the guys who are going to improve game after game.
Look at Gregor's. Gregor's one of those rare guys who did get every opportunity this year, and it did take him most of the year to find his NHL game, right? And he doesn't have an NHL shot, right? So what he needed to figure out is, okay, how do I use my speed and my brains to be a distributor, a playmaker? And he figured it out. Reedy, they kept. This was what frustrated me with Reedy. So he is great at net front. He scores goals at net front. He's he's kind of Pavelski light in some ways with how good he is at tipping pucks. This team decided to try to, and they did this in the minors before they moved him up, and they did it a little bit prior to figuring out, let's just maybe let him get points. They tried to force him to figure out how to score from other areas, which is fucking stupid. That is so dumb. If you've got a player who has talent in a particular area, let him go. Let him go and figure out the other stuff as you go.
Especially if that area is in front of the goalie.
Right.
They did that. I mean, well, and that's the funny thing, right? They did that at the end of the season with Bordelot. They literally threw him in immediately.
Yep.
And they kind of let him do a lot. And one of the things that you saw, one of the things that helped open up Gregor's game, right, and Balcer's on that line, was the creativity that Bordelot brought in. And honestly, I think a lot of that led to. I mean, listen, I know the Sharks were still very frustrated that they were losing, and you could sense it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you also felt like this jolt of energy when Bordelot came up, because all of a sudden, as high risk as some of those plays were, and some of them were very high risk, and some of them didn't work out, and that's fine. Again, the Sharks weren't going to make the playoffs this year anyway, and not at this point at least. That shifted things. So all of a sudden, rather than trying to use this system that's clearly not working in the favor of the players that you have, you allowed this one player, and it was really, honestly, and I could be totally wrong about this, but just as a viewer, just someone who's watching it in person and watching it on TV, it just felt like the second the coaching staff embraced whatever the hell Bordeleau wanted to do on his line and just let those guys play and play a game that felt comfortable to them a little bit more, all of a sudden you see Gregor starting to look really good. You see Balcers starting to look good.
Gregor was doing real well before. Balcers, I definitely agree. I definitely agree. Balcers benefited from both of those guys.
Yeah.
Playing
I'm
creativity.
Not saying that, I'm not disagreeing with you. I thought Gregor had been doing really well all season. He just couldn't find the back of the net. However, you'll notice that the second that Balcers comes in and the play gets a little bit more creative, suddenly he's finding himself in the position or putting himself in the position to get those goals, and he started to get those goals.
Yeah, totally. Let me add something. We could have been seeing this kind of chemistry all year because Bordeleau is just Eklund.
I don't.
They're both smaller, very creative passers. Now, what I will agree with you with is that Bordeleau is better defensively. Yeah. He will make mistakes in the offensive zone, but you know what? The other thing I saw him doing quite a bit was he really anticipates where opposing passes are going to go really well in the neutral zone.
Stick on the ice.
And I am so bullish. I mean, so incredibly bullish on what we saw in Bordeleau that I cannot wait to see him play more. And that's what we could have had this year with some of these young players. They needed time at the NHL level. You guys rightfully complain a lot about player development here, but I don't think the team does a bad job of when they decide to let a guy try to figure it out at the NHL ice. I don't think they do a bad job of that. I think their biggest problem is that they have no idea what they're doing at the Barracuda level.
Yeah.
And most of the guys who would get stuck on the Barracuda would be much better off trying to figure things out at the NHL level.
Well, and I think the issue with the development at the NHL level, especially the last couple of seasons, has literally been the ridiculously, stupidly short leash.
Yes, agreed.
Those young kids are on. So you come up,
agreed.
And that's why I know a lot. Part of it was probably timing. Part of it was probably also the departure of Doug Wilson. But what they did with Bordeleau was interesting.
Yeah, because
part of it had to do with the fact that they had already basically immediately decided to waste a season of his entry level contract, and that probably factored into it. But more so than any other player, they kind of just let him do his thing. Now, don't get me wrong, he did come in and almost immediately start making various impacts, and that's probably part of it as well. But the fact is, he had more of a leash for the most part than any of the other guys have gotten, Eklund included, which, again, it just goes to show that if this organization is going to push the prospects that they have publicly so much, and they do, right? They make you think every, and sometimes it's the fans that overly pump things up too, obviously, but they really try to tell you, no, like, we're in a good position, like, we got these good kids, here we go. But then they don't play them. Yeah. Or they play them in the wrong spot, or clearly a way that they're not comfortable with, and the system doesn't benefit it. Then you look at it from the perspective of, well, do you trust these? Are these the next guys? Because you don't seem to trust them if, Reedy makes one mistake and then he's riding the bench. But again, if you handle it the way that they handled Bordeleau, and again, Bordeleau is full transparency, I think he's something special. He immediately jumps to the top of that prospect depth chart in my mind, and I already knew that he was supposed to be high up there.
Yeah.
And had seen some of his college stuff and thought he's really good, but also thought, hey, this Michigan team is freaking nuts.
Yes.
So there could be some of that. Turns out he's very much the real deal in my mind.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, is that again we spent an entire season using pieces that weren't working and continuing to use them in fashions that didn't work. And I guess you can say, in fairness to the franchise, the Sharks were in a lot of games to a better degree than I think they had been in
totally
last season.
Totally.
And I think they probably let that get in the way of their judgment a little bit, because they were like, well, bad bounce here, different bounce here. But again, at the end of the day, all of a sudden, Bordeleau comes up. he gets some freedom, and he doesn't immediately sit. Although they did shuffle him a little bit here and there, but all of a sudden, all these other guys get to do what they are capable of doing.
But can I jump in for a second here, Alex? Because
they're more fun.
In recognition of why the Sharks were in more games this year than previous years is almost entirely clear to everybody who observed the team. It's James Reimer, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't the aggregate, players that Boughner was putting on the ice, right? The defense still looked bad in a lot of cases throughout the season. The offensive work was, they complained about scoring depth all year because, of course, they were playing guys like Matt Nieto and Cogliano and our seventh. Let me just explain how bad the Sharks' offense was. Like, the seventh best scorer on the team was Nick Bonino with 26 points.
Yeah,
that's bad, and it's not. But and Boughner would say, "Well, you just didn't give me good pieces," and it's like, well, no, you had good pieces clearly, like Scott Reedy and Gregor, who figured it out, etc., who had not been given enough time or previous to this to really find their game, etc. Right? And so it's your play decisions, right? You're the guy choosing to put Gadjevich on the ice, 48 games, 3 points. You're the guy choosing to put Raska on the ice, no points, 5 games, I think it was.
Well, hold on. Shemek would say we don't know who's doing it, whether it's the organization or the coach. But I agree. Yeah. The thing that frustrates me about people who okay. I'm going to include this in my final statement about the season, and I want to hand it off to Colin for his thoughts. I agree that this was an unnecessary waste of a season. What I will say, though, is that unlike last season, which was also a waste of a season, I came out of this season feeling much more encouraged. Now, there's still a lot that could go horribly wrong. There's a GM search that could shake everything up. But I think we started this season with the Sharks having a horrible locker room feeling. It was very apparent early on that they had fixed whatever fracture was going on, be it cancer or a bunch of other things. So the locker room was better, clearly. The guys were playing for each other more, which also good. There was a little less, not always, but a little less individual, heroism trying, we talked about this in the past where all of a sudden the team would break down individuals. They still did that a bit, but you could see that they were playing for each other more. And that's another one of the reasons why I think we saw a couple of close games was this Sharks team felt more resilient than the prior year or years, mainly because it just seemed like they were playing for something, whereas last season it really didn't feel that way. And then you had we got to see a bit of Eklund, which is encouraging. We got to see Bordeleau, which is really encouraging. We got to see especially towards the end of the season, the games got fun, which is good. We got to see some pretty stellar goaltending. Now, what they do with that in the offseason is a little bit up in the air. But, I look at this last season as a waste. Not going to deny that. But I will also say that I at least found it much more positive leaning than I'm going to compare it to the season prior. Season prior to me was just a complete dumpster fire all the way through. Now, it's
contingent though, right? Like that optimism you feel, isn't it contingent on who's coach next year?
Yes.
Yes, but it is true, and same with the GM. And I'm very curious to see what they do, and I'm actually very excited to see what they do because again, I'm one of those people like you guys that feel like they needed changes there. However, I also do think a bit of it is on the individual level for some of these guys. We saw the resurgence of Meyer, right? Who the year before didn't have a particularly great year. We saw Hertl continue to step it up, which is wonderful. We saw again glimpses of Eklund. We saw Bordeleau come in, which was a guy who I didn't expect to have an impact that fast at all. And I'm where you are, Ben. I can't wait for the season to start.
Yeah.
Because I want to watch this kid fly around the ice. And there are a couple of other players, again, we got to see more of Gregor. I wasn't down on Gregor all season. I was frustrated that, probably as equally frustrated as he was, that he couldn't,
find the net
for much of it. But his actual play, you guys know I've been hot on Gregor since before this season because, I've seen him play in the prospect games and stuff and always been excited. But I want to cap this thought off with this, and it does touch on what you were saying, Ben, is for this to matter, to really matter, to take the next step in being positive. Because if we see the same thing again next year without this step, then I'm not as thrilled by the positivity.
Yeah.
And that is that we do need a coaching change. And here was a nail in the coffin for me. I mean, there were a million nails in the coffin so far. Bugner definitely got this locker room in a better mindset. Thumbs up. That's not easy to do with the Shark situation. I don't think it should be ignored. I'm sure the players obviously they did quite a lot of that on their own as well. But it starts from the top down in that instance. But for those who want to look at Boogs from the position of, well, he just doesn't have the pieces. This is a guy who in some of those last games decided that Meyer was slumping. He in the first line we're not scoring, right? This is really more Bordeleau came in, and he decides that the right thing to do is to put Meyer on the fourth line and to move Viel, who isn't going to score, on the first line.
Brain genius stuff.
Your issue here, I understand maybe the desire to he's obviously, he feels like the way you handle Meyer is you punish him and then he comes back hungry. I don't know. But his solution for having a top level player on a top line for the Sharks unable to score is to replace him with a guy who isn't scoring on any line. To me, it's just there were a million other moves that you could make that would have made sense. So that is not an instance of him not having the players. That's a bad decision. And they definitely have to change it. Colin, your feelings on this season?
This season was frustrating to watch because it felt like they actively were making decisions to get to the worst possible outcome. Or I should say nearly worst possible outcomes as they managed to re-sign Hertl. So it was a season of me. I agree. It was a wasted season in terms of results up until the very end. But it was also a season that made me wonder if there is a plan, especially now that we're in transition. And so I'm hoping the transition does mean we do enter a more deliberate rebuild looking thing. But I want to say, as far as I'm concerned, this season had the storybook ending of Bordeleau emerging, joining the team, and getting his first goal in the NHL to defeat Vegas, end their playoff hopes, and the season ended there. Nothing more to say.
That was great. That was a great way to end the season. I also want to point this out too, and this is I'm really looking forward to next season. I was not particularly looking forward to this season. I mean, I was curious, obviously, as we all are, but I kind of assumed that things were probably going to go pretty similarly to the way that they went for the most part. Maybe not the intricacies of the Kane situation, stuff like that. But I think we knew what we were getting at this point based off of the management staff. But I am extremely excited for next season, not just because we're going to have a new general manager, and I like Doug Wilson a lot. Not just because we might have a potential new coach, but because, listen, man, I was hoping that Eklund would come in this upcoming season and be ready to go and do what Bordeleau is more or less doing now. To have him and Bordeleau have that potential, if both those guys come into next season and they're playing anywhere near the way that Bordeleau was playing towards the last couple of games of this season, it turns the Sharks' favors fairly quickly in terms of this sort of, rebuild on the fly. Not completely, mind you, but we go from having maybe one marquee prospect ready to go right away who can grow and blossom to two. And to two that can make it hopefully an immediate impact and who can help with Hertl. Sorry, Couture, I know you're still there. But lead this team forward. That is, I cannot state enough how amazing it will be if Eklund and Bordeleau are both playing anywhere near again what we saw from Bordeleau towards the end of the season, because that to have two guys that are doing that at in the same age range more or less makes a huge difference, especially when you're talking about a team that is going, even with the moves that they will probably attempt to make, will still be relatively cap strapped.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Especially
huge.
To build on that, especially because Bordelot is a center. And one of the things that we talked about in that question of do you move Hurdle or not is that the Sharks' center depth is looking pretty bad at the moment. And if Bordelot is the real deal, that's great because now you've got your top 3 centers locked up for next year. And I would say arguably in terms of like playmaking ability, you've also got Eklund, who plays a little bit like a center but doesn't play center. You've got 4 distributors.
Yeah.
Which, one per line. Go. Right? That's great.
Look at it this way, right? This year, I probably would have said that the Sharks have one really good can bank on line. One really good. Right? Yeah, and then maybe a half of another one. But one good one, right? And that was basically Barabanov, Hurdle, and Meyer.
Yep.
Now we just saw. Now, granted, the Sharks didn't win games, so you need to also recognize that to a degree. But all of a sudden, Balcers, Gregor, and Bordelot looked good. Now you may have 2 lines. Now you've got a spot sitting around with Couture, maybe for Eklund. Now you might have 3 lines. All of a sudden, we go from a 1.5 line team to at least a three competent line team, like overnight. Yep. That's huge. Now, obviously, they got to figure out Barabanov in the offseason. They got to figure out Meyer long term and what they're going to do there, or maybe they flip him. I have no idea. But this team went from one where you just couldn't seem to figure out who to put where to now you got 2 or 3 that are relatively clear. And that, again, that's another huge thing. Yep. And I got to say, I think it's luck. It's not that I don't think they scouted Bordelot really well or guys like Eklund. I do. They did their homework. They got good guys there. But I think, again, Bordelot coming in and just having that impact that fast and making that jump so quickly because college is not AHL. And he came to the AHL and was immediately making an impact.
Yep.
And then he went to the NHL is definitely not college, and it's not AHL either. It's tremendous, and I could not be more stoked to get to this offseason. I know the playoffs are going on, and I know they're fun, but I just want to get to next camp. Like I'm amped. Sorry, Colin. Finish. So the rest of your thoughts on the season? Did you have any other thoughts?
Well, I'm in the same boat. I want to see how the kids come in next season. I want to see the kids actually skate. For me, the big upside on Reedy is if this is his floor, what we saw at the end of the season, and he grows up from there, we have a 4th line center. Like, yay. And it's nice to have, as you guys are talking, it's nice to have these pieces to sort of build around, to be like, okay, we have that sorted. And it was also great to see Merkley. Dahlin was a big surprise for me. That was like the pleasant, oh, hey, here's someone who could be around for a little while and seems to be able to contribute and, complement a bunch of different kinds of play styles. So good to see him. With the rumors of Karlsson, I'm going to be salty over the contract extension of Karlsson forever.
We know.
Well, especially if he flips and we don't. I mean, we're not going to get a 1st round pick for him. So, I'm preparing the salt already. And the same coaching staff next season just makes me worried. I don't see them skating kids who need to actually get experience and make mistakes and be put into the same situation after making a mistake, ideally maybe even the same game if it comes up, just so that they can learn, they can have the opportunities. And I don't see that coaching staff happen. You guys talk about how they let Bordelot sort of do what they want, but this whole season, this coaching staff has basically treated the 3rd and 4th lines as the cage that they throw people into and ignore. And if there's success down there, then it's like, oh, look, we're so brilliant. But otherwise, it's this punishment box. So they just put one of the young players on a 3rd line and just ignored the 3rd line while trying to tinker with the top two lines. And yeah, great. But that just kind of signals to me again that this coaching staff isn't in a place to help form a new team identity. And that's what the Sharks need. And
and that's, I mean, I think we've all talked about it, right? But I'm one of those people who looks at the results that the Sharks are getting and say, even when I'm encouraged, it's still not good enough. But I'm also one of those people that when the Sharks say they're trying to rebuild on the fly, I think that's possible. I've always thought that was possible for the Sharks because I think they actually have some pretty decent pieces. I don't think how they've used them has been great. And I agree with you, Colin. I mean, that to me is very much on the coaching or whoever else is making personnel decisions, because I think you have enough pieces here to make modifications and have a competitive team. Not necessarily a Stanley Cup team, not right away at least, but I don't think, and I've made this perfectly clear a billion times, so you guys are tired of hearing it, but I think you guys agree. I don't think these players have been playing to their full potential, whether it's been a veteran or it's been a kid. And I think it's interesting because you've seen this last season, we saw flashes of brilliance from guys who would then suddenly flare out either because of injury or, maybe they get put on COVID protocol and not quite come back immediately and have the same gusto. But to me, that also sort of spells out, like you mentioned Dahlin. I think Dahlin is a really good example of that. Now that guy had just a pain in the ass season as far as, injuries and having to sit in and out go. And that consistency was probably pretty tough on him. But the fact that you can see him be brilliant and then see him do nothing for a little bit, to me says, hey, the coaching staff, you guys probably aren't using him right or consistently enough for that to be a regular. And again, same goes with, watching Ballsters and Gregor all of a sudden get good. Don't get me wrong. I don't think you could have just made one move and they magically would have been super awesome earlier. I don't think it works that way. I do think it was a lot of the repetition, Ben, as you pointed out, in ice time that kind of let them get there. But also, it's a little weird to me that you throw one guy in and all of a sudden those guys look like wizards.
Well, so you threw that one guy in at the end of the season when they'd had all of that time to do their work. That's the thing.
Understood. But the fact that you couldn't figure out some of that a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
And because of the decisions that you were making that led to sort of that, like, yes, giving them the experience gradually definitely made a huge difference in their development. I'm not going to deny that at all. However, the fact that all of a sudden, snap of a finger, and these guys are looking like one of the best lines there is, especially on the Sharks, it just goes to show that, like, this coaching staff hasn't really known how to use these pieces. And I don't know, again, whether or not it was interesting to see Shemeck's comments. For those of you who missed it, he was sort of talking about, how he was complaining about his ice time, and he complained to the coaches, and the coaches were like, "Oh, that's not us. It's not our call. That's management." And then he went over to management. Management, "Oh no, that's coaching." Like,
Jesus.
Which, look, you guys don't all have to be, passive about it. Someone just step up and say it was their call. But it's interesting because we have had a lot of conversations about how much control does the coaching staff have versus the organization. With the way that the organization is talking, again, they don't always do what they say, but talking about this GM search where sounds like they're not moving that upper management around and that they're making all the calls and this is what they're going to do and blah, blah, blah. That's why people have that, is this GM going to be a figurehead thing? Someone somewhere in this organization or grouping, it's not necessarily that they have just every player's awful. I don't think that's what it is. And I again, that's another reason why I'm kind of looking forward to these offseason moves to see what happens.
Yeah.
Because if you bring in a general manager, and that if that guy actually has any, or woman, it could be a woman, if they have any actual control, one of the first things you always see them do is flip the coach, because they want to bring in their person.
Yep.
And I think, again, our current coach, he's got plenty of things that I think he's all right at. I'm sure he's got plenty of, but I don't think this team, this roster, this organization, and this situation, he's the right person. And having that swap out could be huge. Could go horribly wrong too. It just depends who they bring in. You never know. But at least we'll get some change.
And
I think,
to that vein, though, we've been hearing a lot about. I just wanted to say we've been hearing a lot about how maybe this isn't really a full GM search, right?
Yeah.
Like,
easy to feel that way.
And in that case, what are we really doing here?
Yeah. Well, that's the concern, but that's part of the fun of this offseason is we're going to find out.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, again, I really appreciate all that Doug Wilson did for this franchise. He did a lot, regardless of not winning a cup. He did a lot for the culture. He did a lot for the organization. He did a lot for the community. For us fans, we had an entertaining product that was so close so many times. Again, there's only so much you can do. And yes, he did have some bad moves in there. Any GM is going to have some bad moves. That's just how the job works. But I am excited to see something new, potentially, even if it winds up being a figurehead. Just because if it were still Doug Wilson in there, I feel like I already know. Like we know enough about Doug Wilson and what his strategy is to have a basic idea of probably how things were going to go down. Now, he was probably going to try to pull off some big move again, I'm sure, and all that stuff. But now we don't know at all. And that's exciting.
Yeah.
It gives you something to root for. You look at the young kids, like now all of a sudden, maybe guys who were the established guys aren't going to be. Guys who maybe weren't getting enough of a look might. Or maybe they'll all be gone. Probably not with contracts and stuff like that. But I don't know. Let's talk about that. What are you guys looking forward to in this offseason and for next season based off of what we kind of know now and what we saw last season?
I'm honestly looking forward to camp. Like, yep. I feel like everything up till then is like I'm going to find something to dislike about. If they free up cap space, I'm probably going to dislike something about how they do it because of the realities of the contracts or the financials or whatever. Once we get to camp, that's when all the decisions up to that point get to be evaluated in my mind, because that's when we see who they're skating, who they're actually looking at, who to get hyped for preseason. And I mean, I kind of don't want them to go and sign anybody this offseason because who, why,
right?
What is there to do other than try to pull some chips into your side of the table and evaluate what you have?
Yeah. I mean, they don't have cap space to do that either, which kind of good.
I'm just happy to see. I mean, one of the things I'm looking forward to is having these players not be comfortable. They haven't been happy. That's clear. But now, when you have new people coming in, now again, it's tough to tell with the front office sort of staying where they are, supposedly. But now these guys are going to get reevaluated by someone new to at least some extent, if not multiple new people. And that to me is great. There are a lot of guys on this. I don't want to comment on work ethic because I don't believe a pro athlete really slacks off all that much. It's just not in their nature. I've met plenty of them. I've worked alongside them. They're all hyper competitive, even when they don't seem to be hyper competitive. You have to be to get anywhere at that level. But, I think certainly there's been some complacency, even through the frustration. And now, we might be getting these young guys actually to first of all, we're going to find out which young guys are maybe, the real deal again versus not, hopefully. But everyone's going to get kind of a fresh evaluation, I would think. And that's good. It's good to see the young guys now get a fair shot with newer eyes. It's good to have the veterans get challenged a little bit more for their spots. Now, I'm not saying they're suddenly not going to play Brent Burns or that they even shouldn't play Brent Burns, but you know what I mean? Like, they're still going to, if you got a big contract, you're still probably going to get ice time and all that stuff. But the eyes that have been, making these calls, they're tired eyes at this point. And it's exciting to come in, to your point, Colin, to see who is getting those extra looks. Where are they being put? How are they faring? Which of these prospects that we keep hearing about is going to get a good look at training camp? Are guys like Gushin or Ozzy? Are those guys going to be ready to take the leap quite yet? I think if you're a Sharks fan, I think this offseason is probably going to be one of the more exciting ones, and I think there's a lot to look forward to, even though our cap situation isn't particularly great, even though we still have an aging roster, even though we have quite a few players that are probably going to clog up our system because they're not really tradable, but we can't really do a whole lot else with them. This is definitely a new chapter for this team, and it starts pretty much now that the season's over.
Yep.
So my 2 cents. Ben, what are you looking forward to?
I mean,
or
I'm
what's your
with
outlook, I guess.
I'm with Colin. Well, I can't wait to see camp, but the most important thing I'm waiting to see is the Sharks move on from Boughner. Nothing matters if they stick with this guy, because he's just not good enough.
Yeah, it's also a vote of confidence in the wrong direction.
Yeah, and so for me, it's that is also what I'm looking at in the GM search. Is really, are they really going to bring a guy in who gets to make the decisions that he wants to make, or are they bringing in a figurehead like we've kind of heard they might be doing, and then leaving the 2 guys we expected to end up with the GM, sort of job post DW, meaning Junior and Will. If those guys are still in the organization and it's like Kevin Weeks as GM, then we know nothing's really changing.
Potentially, yeah. And again, for those who don't understand the whole where the figurehead thing's coming from, I can't remember if we potted about this.
No, we didn't.
Ben, yeah, right. So we were just talking about it in the offseason. This is one of the things that I think I pointed out, but I think everyone felt the same way. Was when they announced that they were looking for a new general manager, they also simultaneously announced that basically the front office they didn't have an intent to change the front office, and they also wanted to compete now. So the goals of the organization hadn't really shifted, and the people behind the scenes weren't really shifting. Now, obviously, if you're going to bring in a GM, there's probably going to be some personnel
there should be a shift
at some level. Should be, but when you combine the fact that the team is still saying, well, this is what we're going to do, period, regardless of who we bring in, and we're going to try to bring in someone who does that, which I get it. You want to have your stated intent, that's fine. But when you combine that with, we're not really changing the front office around, or at least the main guys are definitely safe, and then you combine it with what they were saying about, well, DW was a real public-facing general manager. We really want someone to be that face in the community. That's why people get that figurehead impression, because it sounds like what you're looking for is a guy to be your literal figurehead, the guy that's sitting up there talking in front of the cameras, but meanwhile, behind the scenes, all the same people are pulling the same strings.
So I want to see a real GM. I want to see that GM come in and make a legitimate set of changes to the organization. That includes Sommer. Needs to, that includes Boughner. That includes potentially everybody who's in the organization right now. Nobody in the organization inherently deserves to keep their job after 3 seasons like this.
Right.
There might be guys that I'd be sad to see go. I don't know. A lot of what comes out from the organization, you can't really trust. Who's saying what and why. The media is saying certain things about certain guys. So I'm waiting to see what happens with the GM search. I'm waiting to see if the coaching staff gets changed. And if those things happen, I am super excited for what comes next with the young guys. That's how I feel.
Here's the thing, though, and this is kind of important to me. I want to make sure that they pick the right GM. I would love to see them pick someone who's a little bit more progressive with their thinking. I would love to see someone maybe not quite. I don't want someone with some people are just like immediately grabbing player net. Jumbo, Marlowe. No, that's not what I want. I would love to see someone with a bit of experience beyond just playing on the ice, who has some new thoughts or new way to look at the game. That's what I would personally like, because that's what I think the Sharks need. I want to make sure they do this search correctly. I don't want them to do what they did when they basically put Boogs into this position, which was they made it seem like they were going through a really robust coaching search, but never really felt genuine. But here's the catch. I need them to do it relatively quickly.
Yeah.
I want them to pick the right person, but to me, like they're already kind of going, well, we see the start of next season we think is around the draft, blah, blah, blah. We hope to have someone, but for me, it's not hope. I want my general manager in place before the draft and before camp. And the reason for that is, if you're going to make big offseason moves, starts around that draft period. That's when the Sharks have the opportunity to probably make trades if they need to make trades, if the first real opportunity I want to make sure that the general manager is getting guys that, are going to fit whatever system they think they're going to be building in the future, because I would hope you wouldn't be hiring a general manager for 1 to 2 years. I want to make sure that the general manager is evaluating the people at camp. Like, if the Sharks go too far into this offseason and haven't figured out, then I'm going to your point, Ben, I'm going to feel like it's just business as usual.
Yep.
And I think it's really important to have that person in and to allow them to be in with enough time to go into those. If you hire your general manager the day before the draft, unless there's been a stated draft plan, I'm a little concerned about stuff like that. But we'll have to find out. We don't know.
Yep.
I don't know. Good stuff.
Kind of a low note, because it's all anticipation. Like, for me, the upswing is like none of the are we in the chase for the top, like, free agent and all that sort of drama. I just get to have some popcorn and watch everyone freak themselves out over I don't even know who it is this season.
Me neither.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be different. Hey, this is a tricky one, but we kind of got to do it. Who are your 3 stars for the season?
I don't think that's particularly tricky.
Yeah, I don't think it is either, but Colin's scared, so we're going to let him go last. Ben, you go first.
I mean, I think obviously the first star of the season is Timo Meier, particularly given, where he ended last season. And, to be essentially a point per game player 1 year after people were wondering if maybe he'd already plateaued is pretty fucking incredible.
That's your first star or third?
So I'm going first to third. My second star is Tomas Hertl, just because this team runs on him at this point. So I'm glad he's still around. Third star is probably actually the hardest, because I think there's a couple of guys who really, really, played as well as they could, and had injury issues too. So I don't know. Third star, let's throw it out to Barabanov, probably because he won't be here next year because he'll be too expensive.
Funny, because my 3 stars are similar, but not the same. I agree. I think the first star is Meier, because that was a major turn and a sudden one. I think a lot of people, to your point, people were talking about his career already being done, which is a little bit crazy. But, he didn't look great last year, and this year he was a superstar. So he's definitely my first star. My second star, I'm also going to give the Hertl for pretty much the same reason. Hertl continues to improve. I think we saw a little bit more of his leadership capabilities this season.
Yeah.
Again, no offense to Couture here, but it bums me out that I want this team to be Hertl's team at this point. And that's not saying I don't want Couture on the roster, but it's just, God, that energy is great. I'm going to give my third star. So this is tricky, because I do think, look, Barabanov turned out to be great. Watching Bordeleau come up and flash quickly, I can't tell you how much fun and encouraging that was.
He just didn't spend enough time with the team for me to give him a star.
Totally understood. Yeah. I'm going to give my third star to another player that I don't think will necessarily be here next year. I'm not really sure, and that's Reimer, who...
Oh, God, of course.
Reimer, listen, this is a guy who everyone has pretty much only ever looked at as a backup.
Yeah.
And that's not to say he hasn't had opportunities to take starting jobs in the past, but everyone just sort of puts him in that backup role. He was incredible. Not only did he play well for his age, but he looked legit. It actually pains me that the Sharks have the goaltending situation they have going into this offseason, because I look at it right now and I think, well, Hill's not tradable at this point, just given the fact that he was injured for so much of the season that, no one's going to really, there wasn't enough to sell him on.
Yeah.
Kähkönen and Reimer, to me, as a tandem, I would be completely fine with that. I felt Kähkönen got the short end of the stick in a couple of those games in terms of actually getting the wins, but I thought he played really well. But man, Reimer had flashes of a goaltender that we hadn't really seen since the Bakov, where it's just he would stand on his head. He kept the Sharks. You want to talk about the attitude of the team changing. A lot of that had to do, and I think you said this earlier, Ben, with Reimer's ability to backstop and keep them in the game, even in games where they absolutely did not deserve to be kept into. He was a huge spark.
I feel real dumb for not having actually given a star to Reimer, so thank you, Alex, for catching that. He deserves it.
But see, that's the funny thing is I was thinking you were going to say Reimer and you say Barabanov, and I had the same reaction going, shit, I didn't think about Barabanov getting a star. But that's the thing, is that we had a bunch of guys who I would say the heroes on the team this season were some of the guys that you were least expecting them to be. I mean, I think we knew that Barabanov felt like he was, okay, but not. I don't think we thought he was going to be as effective as he was. Reimer's another guy where we thought, all right, well, here we go, and it turned out to be, incredible goaltending. I think this season, especially given the Sharks play, and same goes for Myers, another one again, where we kind of were praying that he'd be good again, but there was no indication that anything was going to change. Same coach, same situation, and he did. So there's a lot of good options there. Colin, your 3 stars of the season.
All right, so first star is gonna go to Meyer because even though he really did just sort of check out of games, you can't blame him considering the season that the team was having. But he has that spark every now and again to just grab the puck and carry the play, and it's really great to see that waking up. Second star, I think I'm gonna take the Coward's Door and do a group second star. I'm gonna throw it to Eklund. I'm gonna throw it to Bordeleau. I'm gonna throw it to Reedy, to Gregor, to Dahlin, to all the young guys who have navigated the various weirdness of this team and have earned themselves a spot to show up next season. And even more so Leonard, because that poor guy got to come up, show that he was ready to stay up and get the experience and take the next step, and then got thrown back down in the basement and had to wait until the end of the season to come back up again, and then, as you say, goes down to injury. And my third star is going to Reimer, and whoever happened to be his Robin at that particular moment in the season, since he just seemed to go through sidekicks left and right. But it just seems like this is the season of the failing goaltenders, with everybody on their second, third, or fourth goaltender. So it's nice to be backstopped. It's nice for the team to have that steady, consistent metronome behind them, where those of us who've been standing up and pointing at the team saying, look, it's not the goaltending, it's the team.
We're wrong.
Can finally say, look, it's the team, not the goaltending, because we have a goaltender.
Well, no, I mean, but what I mean by that, to build on that, Colin, is I was screaming that this team was dying, at least in large part because their goaltending was awful. And we just got finished talking about a season in which the Sharks felt like they were in more games, and they were in more games because they had a legitimate goaltender. Now, I still think that guy should have been traded for assets at the trade deadline, but nonetheless, here we are.
But he was injured. He was he'd
come back before the trade deadline and played a game.
Yeah, no, they could have. They decided not to, or they weren't getting enough of an offer to do it. And again, I think that's what's going to make this offseason so interesting, because Kakinen and Hill are not a tandem, not enough of a tandem in my mind.
We just don't know yet, right?
We don't. But but I'll tell you what.
And I worry about a Reimer tandem
as far as movable pieces are concerned. Reimer's still at the top of the list right there, especially if you want to get value.
Yeah.
But I would feel 1,000 times more comfortable with Reimer and Kakinen.
Yes. I agree in terms of if you're trying to win, right?
Well, here's the thing. I'm excited again. So I'm excited about next season. I'm not expecting him to suddenly pull out a Stanley Cup. That not at all. But I am hoping for improvement, and I see a lot of positivity that can lead to it. I can see the path forward to an extent. The Sharks goaltending pipeline right now not phenomenal. So the thing is that like if you do move Reimer in the offseason, which again I'm not saying is the wrong move necessarily.
Right.
I do get a little more nervous because I don't feel like Kakinen and Hill. And again, to your point, we don't know. I understand that.
But also, how do we find out? Right.
I do know what Reimer is. So for me, I feel like if we were to go into next season with Reimer still on the roster, with whatever combination of the other guys you have to take, I feel like at least that portion of the ice is figured out.
But here's here's the issue there though, right? And we ran into this year, which is we thought Hill was going to be the guy and Reimer was going to be the backup because the team clearly needed to figure out the future of its goaltending because Reimer's not going to be around forever. He's the older guy. Then they didn't, right? They played Reimer like crazy. And my concern is if they keep Reimer, and again, if the other changes aren't made, then it doesn't really matter because Reimer will play. If you're trying to figure out what Kakinen is so that you can secure the future of your goaltending, that is harder to do if Reimer's on the team. You're rolling the dice, right? A Hill Kakinen combo could be death, but a Reimer Kakinen combo incentivizes the coach to try to win by playing Reimer, and then you don't find out what Kakinen is, and it's the same fucking problem we're running into with the forwards and the defensemen when the young guys should be playing and the veterans don't, because or the veterans do instead. That's my fear.
Can I tell you where my shift in thinking has come, though?
Sure.
And you are 100% correct in that analysis. 100% correct. Reimer, what Reimer showed me this season that I wasn't expecting was that he's first of all, he's better than I thought he was. To be blunt, I thought he was a great backup. I was always comfortable with him there. When he came in and we had the cup run, I thought it was great. I was bummed to see him, go in that fashion, but completely understood. Despite his age, I feel like Reimer's got plenty in the tank to get us a couple more seasons if we really needed it. Now, again, I'm not saying that's necessarily what you do. To your point, it's a gamble. Sharks haven't been great at gambling so far. We'll open that up. But they've also been terrible with complacency. So I am torn both ways. But I actually now, in the beginning of the season, I felt the way I felt about needing to find a younger guy because I didn't think Hill had that level of play in him, let alone feel the confidence that if he had a spark or two of a game, that it would be something that he could hold consistently. Having seen him play this season now, I actually feel like he might have quite a bit more to give, and that makes me a little bit more comfortable to allow the franchise to make sure that they get the right guy in. Now, to your point, what I don't want to see is Reimer playing 90% of the games. We can't keep doing what we were doing with Jones, where you're just riding one goaltender through and through. Doesn't help anyone. It burns out the goaltender. We've seen that, especially if you're talking about a guy like Reimer. Don't get me wrong. For the workload that Reimer had, even through injury and stuff, he looked phenomenal. But I don't want to keep wearing him down. He's going to continue to get older. And even if to me, even if he's aging a little bit backwards, like Pavelski, let's say, like you don't want to kill him. So I hope that you would play a bit of a balance. But I'm not necessarily feeling where I did the beginning of the season, which was Reimer's only good as sort of like a short-term backstop solution. I actually feel like I would never sign a goalie long-term. I think you guys know that by now.
Yeah.
But I definitely feel like we could have him for like 2 or 3 years and be all right. You know what I mean? I don't feel like he's suddenly going to suck tomorrow. I think he looks really good, and I think he's got a lot to play for. So I'm a little more comfortable there. But again, you're 100% correct. It just depends on how they use him. I'm really banking if he stays, which again I think he's more valuable gone from a organization perspective in terms of the return, because he's one of the more tradable assets. But if he's here, I hope whoever they bring in utilizes the goaltenders a little bit smarter than we've seen in the past. That's my shift in thinking. I hope that makes sense.
Well, I hope you're right.
I don't know. I went from being happy that Reimer was around as a safety net to feeling like, no, this guy's actually legit number one and can be for long enough for the Sharks to really sort things out, versus having to sort that out like today, which is where I felt at the beginning of the season. I definitely felt like, okay, I didn't think Hill was a number one. I didn't. I thought he was.
Yeah.
I thought he was.
And I don't know that I don't know that he is. I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm less sure he is now than I was, during the season, given injuries and all that. And I'm higher on Kakkonen than I am on Hill, so that's where I kind of am.
Me too. I'm way higher on Kakkonen.
And as you say, it's time to sort things out, because I think the first check will be preseason.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, we'll get to see who they're skating, who gets to skate multiple games, who's actually sticking around. And then we'll see in December. And in December, it's like, okay, who's actually getting ice time? And that's ignoring coach changes, GM changes, whatever. Because all of that sort of falls down in front of what they actually do on the ice. And I'm optimistic in the view that they kind of have nowhere to go. Like, they are genuinely insane if come next season they're just kind of skating out the exact same roster with, Cogliano 2.0 picked up for $1 million in the off season. Like, so that's why I'm just in this like neutral place. I'm a little alarmed to see the Karlsson discussions, but at the same time, I'm really hoping this is just bait switch on Burns. Not because I want Karlsson to stick around, just because I want some return from that whole debacle. But
let's be clear too. Karlsson is the better defenseman right now.
Yeah,
true.
I totally agree. If I had to keep one, just based off of tradability of Burns right now,
yeah,
because I think he's easier to trade for obvious reasons,
yeah.
And overall, look, I mean, I think Karlsson's good. Injuries, annoying. It is what it is. But the reality is, I think Karlsson's one of those guys where I think if you cater the team a little bit around him and his goals, I think he's going to explode in a good way. And the Sharks sort of just aren't doing that, and it's square peg round hole with the roster in general. And that's why you're not really, if you feel like Karlsson doesn't want to be here because, you're just reading that from his statements, it's probably because it sucks to be there right now if you're Karlsson. But that doesn't mean you can't fix that. And I hope they do. I hope they figured it out. Hey, guys, guess what? Was there anything else that you guys wanted to cover for this season?
I mean, I think the only other thing, and maybe this is a different podcast, is we talk about, who the Sharks should move on from roster-wise, like Milosh.
Sure.
And
I would want to
Magnan.
I would want to talk about that coming out of the draft, because I mean, there's still the hope we could get the miracle draft. Not going to happen, but it's possible. I'm dying to see what direction they go with their draft choices, the limited number of choices they have.
Yeah, but those draft picks again, I don't.
It's going to be a while.
Draft and you're waiting, and you don't know who you're walking away from by that point. There's something wrong. Like, it's not the way that I would personally plan.
They probably know who they're walking away with, or who their like main targets are. I have no idea, and I'm curious to see who they go for, because to me that's the first indication of where the team sort of feels like, okay, we're looking for this direction of talent in the longer term.
Yeah, but you're talking like 3 or 4 years down the line on average, right? In a good situation. So that's
I guess
the Sharks are the Sharks are quote unquote in win now mode.
I mean, we'll see. We're a top 15 draft pick, so maybe.
Ah, boy, you're way more optimistic about it than I am. Ben, what were you going to say?
I was just gonna say what I mean is like, so they're gonna have to make RFA and UFA decisions on
right.
Milosh, Magna, Ferraro, Dahlin, Gregor, Chems, Gadjevich, Leonard, and Barabanov. And obviously, I have very specific, perspectives that the defense sucks and Magna and Milosh suck and should be allowed to walk away, right? So I just was curious whether we should do that now or talk about that in a future podcast.
Let's talk about that in a future podcast. Because I definitely have thoughts, but I think I want to take a step back and really formulate them before we go too far. Because part of me says, look, here's a handful of pieces you keep and shuffle everything else.
Yeah.
But I also want to be a little bit more measured with it. So we'll do that. Well, I'll tell you what. We'll conclude the podcast here. Just in case you guys were wondering, next week the Sharks play no one. Their season's over and they're not in the playoffs. The playoffs are fun, though. Again, if you don't watch other teams play ever, NHL playoffs are always fun. There's always something to root for in there. You still got Pavs and Jumbo skating around, and there's lots of great storylines and lots of really close series. So pay attention to that. The Sharks finish their season 6th in the Pacific with a win-loss record. Win-loss and overtime loss. God, I hate that third thing. At 32, 37, and 13. So under 500. Obviously, they had a goal differential of negative 50. Yikes! But they were in last, I guess. Although also, I say that, but then you look.
Kind of wish they were.
And you get to the Atlantic and you realize that that Buffalo finished 5th in their division. Now, these are different divisions, but I just never liked the thought of Buffalo finishing above me in anything in life. But there you go. Hey, guess what, folks? That wraps the season. We do pod through the offseason. We might pod more through this offseason than we typically do, but we also take a little bit of a break. So it might be a little bit sporadic, but stay tuned. You can subscribe to this podcast on Apple's iTunes and podcast apps or wherever you get your podcasts. Android people, you're the wherever you get your podcasts. Or that wants me to say Spotify. It's also on Spotify. You can check us out there. Hey, make sure you rate us on either platform. That helps out. 5 stars. Yeah. You can also check out these podcasts on the web at circlingthecup.com. You can check out us, Ben, at Twitter at Circling the Cup. I'm sure I'll be tweeting quite a bit through the off season. And of course, we are on Facebook. So write us questions. We will answer them at facebook.com/circling the cup. We also do have a Discord, which I'm sure Ben will tweet out occasionally when he remembers what it is. But that is a bit active, and we do talk to people in the off season there. So always happy to take your questions, especially in the off season. It's great to have lots of topics to talk about. So feel free to write in. Maybe we'll name an entire podcast after you. Probably not, but we'll probably use your question in there. Well, guys, that concludes another year of Sharks Talkie. Exciting things are afoot. Hopefully, we get some juicy news to talk about, and we have stuff to look forward to for the new season. But that concludes the 2021-2022 Sharks season. Say bye-bye, guys.
Wet fart noises!
Go Toronto.
Oh, God damn
it. Bye-bye. Cool. That was fun. Yeah, good point, Ben. I just want to think more about, because otherwise I'm completely shuffle the deck.
No, yeah, I mean,
I think it does make sense to do a podcast on that and actually be a little bit more measured.
Cool.
With it.
Let's plan a specific Sunday to do that and give us everybody time to build a list and check it twice.
My wife's out of town again, and I have the boys, which makes it a little bit complicated. But
that's fine.
Maybe the one after or something like that, because I definitely think we need to do it before the draft, or before UFA
the
season actually ends.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was fun, guys. I'll talk to you soon.